Scott Mitchell, what's up, man?
Hello, Chip. How are you today?
I am doing great. Feeling independent. How about you?
Absolutely. Yeah, the same thing. Celebrated the fourth and had a great time. So it was very nice.
Good. Yeah, I feel even more independent today. As you know, Trish and I have come through a bout with the Rona. COVID has
Mm.
returned to our home, and so we spent last week dealing with that. And so I'm excited to be free from that and feeling better and being able to get out and enjoy some of the summer weather.
Good, good. Glad you're better. That stinks. I kind of haven't paid COVID a whole lot of attention, I don't think, over the past year or so, but obviously it's still out there.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think I told you I called my doctor thinking it was a sinus infection, and and the nurse who answered the phone said, "Have you taken the COVID test?" And I was like, "Is that still, And she's like, "Yeah." And so the first one was positive so quickly, I thought that the test was broken. And so I took a second one, and again, needless to say, whoever makes those tests understands how it works, and it is still a thing. So, you know, be careful out there. Kind of like a
Yeah.
flu, just a real heavy cold. But anyway, speaking of things that are not cold, how's that for a
I
transition?
love it.
The
Perfect.
stock market, first half of the year, we're kind of as we head here into July, it is it's one of those things we like to do is kind of take a look back, see how things have gone, and then talk a little bit about what we're looking for or expecting going into the second half of the year.
Yeah, so you're right. June was the second consecutive up month for the S&P 500. Think we were down a little bit in April, but and then so for the first 6 months of the year, five of the six were up, which that's pretty good. We were up about 14.5% on the S&P 500, which was the 15th best start to a year going back to 1928. So yeah, we've had a really good start to the year so far, especially, and we can talk about this some more, but especially for the cap weighted index, which is the one that's usually quoted when people talk about the S&P 500. They talk about the cap weighted index. The flaw in that is that it weights the largest companies. So for right now, it'd be the Apples and Nvidias and Microsofts, and a handful of others, but those are a disproportionate weighting towards the S&P 500 right now. And in fact, I think the disparity is as great pretty much as it's ever been, for as long as the S&P 500 has been around. So the point is, those few stocks are doing incredibly well. The rest of the market not as well. So if you look at just the raw index number, the one that's reported on, the nightly news or whatever, it looks a lot better than what the average stock looks like, just because of the way that the index is made up. So it's really weird, and I think it can make sometimes investors feel like they're not keeping up with the index. But in reality, I mean, whose portfolio is 35% composed of just five stocks? And that's not a very smart way really to build a portfolio, or one that'll last. It's fun in times like these, but as you can imagine, when it has up periods like this, it can at times have down periods like this, and you definitely wouldn't want to own a portfolio of just those five or six names in a period like that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and it cuts both ways, right? In terms of we've had investors over the years who weren't excited at all about what has proven to be those, uh, six or seven names that have performed extremely well. Didn't want to be in technology at all, and as they have kind of dipped their toe into that area, it's nice for them to be participating. Again, moving out of some of the old, let's say, new cores or Duke Energies or some of those kinds of things that we may have seen, um, 20 years ago. Not that we don't still own those things, but again, technology for a long time was stuff that some of our clients didn't care about being in. As they have nudged into that, that's been positive thing. I think the flip side of that is, to your point, you can end up overweighted. if you're not careful, and you can have too much of a good thing. I think you and I can think back to Lucent Technologies is probably my favorite story. And so you just want to be mindful of the fact. And to your point, I think it's six or seven stocks that make up 35% of the S&P 500, which means that the rest of it is made up of 493 stocks. And yeah, we in an ideal world, you want to see all of them participating, but being driven by those few means, as far as I'm concerned, that the other 493 probably have some room to run if at some point we rotate out of that.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And I'll kind of put a bow on this diversification uh, that we've been alluding to. It's a great strategy. Of course, it doesn't mean you won't have losses sometimes, because you will. And in fact, I like to joke that diversification means always having to say you're sorry. So you're never in, just concentrated in the hot stocks, but at the same time, you're never concentrated in the stocks that are doing the worst either. And I'm sure we can all think back to times over the past 20 or 25 years when the markets really struggled and diversification was a good thing. People wanted to have their money spread out across lots of different sectors because sometimes, to your point, it's not technology. Sometimes it's utilities or consumer staples or healthcare stocks. And your example of Lucent's a great one. It was the most widely held stock in the country in the late 90s. More people owned Lucent than owned any other stock. And if the company still exists, it's been gobbled up by, another company by now. So it would have been very conceivable for a person to lose 90 or 95% of their money in that stock, even though it was widely agreed upon as being a good stock to own since so many people owned it. So yeah, again, it does cut both ways. So diversification, uh, more often prudent than not.
For sure. Yeah, it is. I think that you and I have talked before about the fact that diversification isn't necessarily the way to get rich. It's the way to stay that way. And
Right.
so when we get to a place where we have confidence, we talk a lot about confidence, whether it's in retirement or whatever. Diversification is definitely a key to that. So,
I
talk a
think so
little bit
too.
more, Scott,
Mhm.
about kind of some of the other macro things that are going on right now.
Well, generally speaking, I mean, the economy appears to be slowing. I'd say if, there's five pieces of data that come out, four of them lean that way. And then though you get that one and it indicates that the economy is not slowing or it's speeding back up or it's still hot, whatever. But again, if we're just looking at overall trends, it looks like the economy is slowing down. Now, that's probably a good thing, right? Because it's going to bring inflation down, not necessarily prices down, but at least the prices won't be going up as much. And in some cases, you are seeing prices come down. Notably, used car prices got a lot of press back a few years ago, especially when new cars couldn't be produced very quickly because factories were shut down due to COVID. Now that factories are in full production, used car prices have actually come down. So there are things like that that were kind of just crazy one-offs that led to a really high average inflation number back a couple of years ago that now are going to help to bring that inflation number down. Now, of course, we're not seeing it at the grocery store so much. It is shocking to me, and I'm not a huge grocery shopper, but when I do, like I can't believe what things cost in the store. I don't expect those prices to come back down. And in fact, I'm not sure it'd be really healthy if they came back down. What we'd like ideally, I think, is for prices to stay flat, and let our incomes catch back up with what food prices cost. So generally speaking, I think the economy is slowing, but in a good way. And we're seeing signs of lower inflation. Those signs that have crept in now have actually led to where there's the futures markets are pricing a 67% probability of a Fed rate cut in September, which is up a lot from just a month ago. So more and more those ideas of a Fed rate cut are being factored back in. You may remember at the beginning of the year, a lot of people thought the Fed would cut 3 times this year, and there were some models that were predicting 6 rate cuts this year. Well, now I don't think anybody thinks there'll be 6, and even 3 seems like a lot. But the fact that the first one might come up in September is indicative of an economy that is slowing, but in a healthy way, really pretty much just the way that the Fed probably tried to engineer it originally.
Yeah, I think that at least for the people that I talk to, from a prices standpoint, it'd be nice to catch your breath. You know, whether we're looking at home prices or particularly things that people buy every day, groceries. I saw a statistic the other day that groceries were up some percentage and food not eaten at home was up like 2 or 3 times that. And so yeah, I think it really is you're seeing shifting. I forget, was the McDonald's meal supposed to be $19 somewhere? You know, you're seeing a lot of people pushing back on some of these prices. And so I think that, again, as much as anything, just be nice to catch our breath as far as some of that. It's interesting to me, Scott, the dynamic of how things, just looking at how things all work together, right? We had wages increasing at one point, and it was one of those things where that was encouraging, and then inflation hit, and the prices kind of, you know, almost outpace that, and now all of a sudden you're feeling like the average person's feeling tight again. So it's just interesting to me, and it also, another thing that strikes me as interesting is your commentary about or you're noting that at one point people thought 3 to 6 rate cuts, and here we are mid-year and we don't have one. We might get one in September, and what that says to me from a practical standpoint is the same thing as 100% of economists saying we were going to have a recession, which is the most important thing either of us can do and that we can help our clients do is to do the next right thing given where we are right now. And I think that's a big part of, again, just a tactical component is continuing to make the next right decision.
Right. And yeah, it's so hard to predict, what is going to happen to what you mentioned about that survey from last year, that 100% of those economists said we'd have a recession. And even if you look historically at the Federal Reserve, they have a poor track record of predicting their own outcomes. So like not even they can predict what they're going to do, which is interesting. And it's also, I think that's great, because that means that they're using information to change their minds. And that's healthy. Like I would hate for them to, cut rates just because they said 6 months ago that they would cut rates. That's foolish. And so to your point, I think we have to do the same thing. We have to understand that data, information, situations, people's lifestyles, whatever it may be, they change. They're not static. And so you have to update your plan, whether that's your investment plan or your spending plan or your vacation plan or whatever it is, with the change in information. Obviously that just doesn't make any sense to just be bullheaded and stick with something that you had set, a year or two ago. To not adjust that for new information doesn't make any sense to me, at least.
Yeah, well, there are two things that change every day that impact how resources ought to be allocated. One is the markets, and the other one is your life. And they're always both, with the exception maybe of the markets on the weekends, they're always changing. And so I think that you have to consistently look at both of those things and make sure that one's lined up with the other. We do a lot of talking about that. Scott, when you look at the second half of the year, what are your thoughts? Now, you and I said, I don't know, maybe on our last kind of one of these together, we talked about a spicy election cycle. What do you see in the second half?
So historically speaking, a good first half leads to a good second half. So I think the odds are in our favor. Again, that That doesn't mean that things can't go the other way, but the odds are in our favor of a good second half of the year. There's, we've used the traffic signal in the past for an outlook. For me, it's kind of flashing red right now, especially on the cap weighted S&P 500 index. It looks very overbought, about as overbought as I can remember. So if you told me that the S&P 500 index pulled back over the next month or two, especially leading into this election, that wouldn't shock me at all. Now, the equal weighted index, as we pointed out, it's up like 4.5% year to date. So it's not up nearly the 15% or so that the cap weighted index is. So there's probably less concern of a pullback for your average stock, which I think is probably good news for most of us, since again, we're not generally overweighted in just those Magnificent Seven type stocks. So I'd be less worried about that. But I think there's certainly the room, if you're just looking at the indexes, if you're just looking to check to see at the end of the day, does the stock market go up or the stock market come down? There is room for downward movement on the S&P 500 over the next few months. And I think the economy's okay. There's no, I don't think there's a big scare out there, but I think given the fact that it has run up so much, again, especially in those handful of names, wouldn't shock me to see that pull back a little bit. So I think you just be smart. There's, the election, as we've referenced several times in our talks. It's likely to be wild. It's already pretty wild, and so
Unexpected for sure.
yeah,
Again, at this point, it's a lot quieter than I thought it would be. So far. So
right.
we would,
Although,
especially over the last couple of weeks.
yeah, well, we've just, as we're talking today, the last week was the first debate, and I think, we've already seen election odds shift fairly dramatically just since then, and they'll shift again between now and November, I'm sure of it. So again, I like the average stock. I think there's value out there, but it's definitely not in the stuff that's been moving a lot. I don't think there's a lot of value out there in those large stocks. Now, I do want to make a quick contrary point to that, and that is in the past year, those Magnificent Seven stocks have been responsible for about 85% of the S&P 500's earnings growth, but only about 47% of the price gain in the index. So again, that's seven stocks responsible for 47 of the percent of the price gain, nearly half. That's a lot, right? But
No doubt.
their earnings over that same time period have nearly doubled. So I think you could make the argument that their prices haven't even kept up with the earnings. But still, I'm going to lean on the side that they are a bit overbought, at least short term. And it's certainly possible the earnings continue to grow even more for those large stocks, and and they'll catch up to, it'll all sort of even out. But nonetheless, they've had a remarkable gain. It's justifiable because those companies are performing at a remarkable level. I mean, fundamentally, not just the stock price, but fundamentally, their earnings growth rate has been spectacular. So, but it would be much healthier to have the rest of the index catch up. As I said, the rest of the S&P, if you equal weight the S&P 500, it's up 4.5% year to date. So again, that leads me to believe that's kind of what the average investor's portfolio looks like, is up 4.5% or so, just because that's what the average stock is up. And I do want to make clear too that if our clients have portfolios that we manage on a discretionary basis, we own those stocks. We own those large seven stocks, so we're participating. So
We don't own them at a rate of 35% of the
no, of
portfolio.
course not. Yeah, that's just, again, I don't, I'm a fiduciary, and that just doesn't seem very, if you gave someone the responsibility to manage someone else's money, I doubt that you would put, 35% of their money into, seven stocks. That just doesn't seem very responsible to me. Again, it's working out beautifully right now. I'm glad we own those stocks, but I'm also glad we're not overweighted them because I do see the opportunity. If there's any sort of pullback in the market, those would be the ones that would probably get hit the most since they're the ones that have participated the most.
Sure. And well, and I think one of the things, and I may get the quote wrong, that you said to me before is you'd rather be wrong and conservative than
Mm.
wrong and aggressive. I don't know if that's exactly the wording you used, but
Wrong and
it
reckless.
certainly
Yeah,
seems to be this.
I don't want to be wrong and reckless. Right. Yeah.
Right.
That's the, yeah. So yes, I'd rather be wrong and too conservative than wrong and too reckless. I think especially with our clients' money, I imagine that most of them feel that way. Again, for the most part, they have earned money and saved it, and we're responsible for the maintenance of their lifestyle throughout retirement. So again, I'm tickled that we are participating in the growth of these large stocks, but also and it certainly I sleep better at night knowing that we don't have, a third of the portfolio in just those handful of stocks.
For sure. Well, and most of our signature life plans, for those who have taken the time to do that, are based on a 5.5, 6% ish, I think, rate of return in terms of their kind of life index, if you will. And so I think that, again, it is one of those things where wrong and reckless, I think, is absolutely, if we were doing the diagram, the square of what you don't want to be, those are probably, yeah, I mean, that's the
Yeah,
square you don't want to
wrong
be
and
in.
reckless. Yeah,
So,
yeah. Keep me out of that
yeah,
box.
yeah. Well, speaking of though, one of the things that I kind of lean a lot into is controlling what we can control. And one of the things that, for me, that is looking at a lot of the other non-investment components. And one of the things you and I did a couple of weeks ago was we went with four other of our team members down to Raymond James and spent some time at the home office looking at some of the resources that we have that are in addition to the traditional investment space. We looked at some of the other resources available. What were your thoughts on our trip?
Well, I first and foremost, I was it's like super impressed with the resources that Raymond James has for our especially our high net worth clients. That's not something that you and I talk a lot about, especially on these podcasts, just because it doesn't really apply to everybody. But for people that are interested in things like estate planning, our trust department is like I think a really useful tool for a lot of people. A lot of our clients are interested in how they can control their money, either control the taxes on it or control how it flows to beneficiaries, things like that. Our trust department's great. We've noticed other financial institutions pulling back on the trust services that they offer, or at least not offering them on a local basis anymore. And we can do that now. So I think that's really exciting. There's also we don't talk about alternative investments very often because they tend to be less liquid and you just have to know kind of what you're getting yourself into with some of the alternative investment products. But for some people, they are a good tool to diversify yourself so you're not worried about, again, being locked into these top 5 or 10 stocks. Um, we've got a private credit fund that, again, it's illiquid, it's not for everybody, but it's got an income stream of 12%, which I mean, you mentioned 5 or 6% being the bogey for our signature life plans. I mean, 12%, you know, that obviously would fit in pretty well to most people's signature life plans. So I think the quality of the people was what impressed me the most. But then aside from that, just the breadth of offerings that we have for our clients that we probably don't talk about enough. It's remarkable, and I'm glad we have that as as an opportunity.
For sure. Yeah.
How about you?
Well, and I'll touch on that. Kind of the three things that actually four things that really struck me. Number one, to your point, was the capabilities of the trust department and all of the things that again, I'm trying to get away from the term estate plan. Nobody wants to plan their estate. How about if we just reterm it kind of estate and family leadership? Because I think all of us want to be, those of us who are parents at least, want to lead our families in a way that long term is going to lead to be, success, whatever that means for the individuals in our family. So kind of transitioning from the signature life to the signature legacy, and really looking at what's next there. And that's a great resource both for reviewing documents, but also if at some point somebody needed a corporate trustee or executor, any of those kinds of things. I was just impressed with the breadth of services there. Second was the bank. Again, another thing we don't talk about a whole lot is that Raymond James owns a bank. I joked with them that they're the people that they loan money to people who don't need it. But in reality, one of the things that we can control is if we have debt, what we're paying for that. And so evaluating all the different options, and they've got some really creative stuff. And that's one of the things, Scott, that I'm super pleased that we did over the years is we've got a lot of clients who do have debt, for example, on homes, where we went in and refinanced homes and did some things with the debt side of the balance sheet that now has been incredibly favorable with the rise in interest rates. The third and probably the most important thing for most of our clients to control is Raymond James has a lot of longevity resources. We're at a point now where when you get to a place where you feel like you'll have enough money to live a long time, then the goal is to live a long time and to live as long and as comfortably as possible and have your health span match your lifespan. And Raymond James has a lot of great resources, whether that is helping find a long-term care facility or having somebody come out and audit your home. Audit might be the wrong word, but evaluate your home for how to stay as long as possible, as safe as possible. And for a lot of people, that's a big deal. And just having that resource is incredible. We've talked about a lot of those things. Medicare. There's a Medicare service that we have access to evaluate kind of some of the different options. I know, Scott, you were impressed with some of those too.
Yeah, I really like the longevity. You're right. I failed to mention it, but it's impressive, and you're right. It's not only the quantity of life, but the quality of life. And so I don't know. I don't think those aren't things that our clients think to call us about. I don't believe. It's probably not when they think of us, it's usually about their money, but we have a lot of resources. I'm helping a client out right now. He's going to retire in a couple of years, and we're already starting to look into Medicare planning. Like, we have a whole department that can help our clients figure out what Medicare plan is best for them. So yeah, it's yeah, if you're a client or if you're not, still reach out to us. And we have a lot of things that even if we can't do, we can point you in the right direction on.
And we'll try to do a better job of highlighting those things, Scott.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I think you and I both historically have tried. The last thing we want to be doing is feeling like we're being overly promotional. But it also is important for us to highlight the resources that we have, and there are a lot of them. And so we'll try to make a point to do a better job of that. The last thing, Scott, talking about controlling what we can control, that I was super impressed with. I even took a couple of pictures of was we got to go see the cybersecurity center and how they pay attention to and monitor and do all those things with regards to cybersecurity at Raymond James. And I was really impressed with that.
It's really cool. It was an amazing setup. And you may have seen the movie War Games back in the 80s. Remember that with Matthew Broderick when he was just a teenager still? And
the only way to win is not to play.
That's right. And the game is thermonuclear war, and it's got all the simulated warheads going back around the world at each other. And so that's what this situation down there looked like, except instead of warheads, it was um, uh, it was cyber attacks on a Raymond James asset somewhere, and they were blocking them, and they're coming in all the time, and it's just so neat. And we even have resources, to help people make sure that they're keeping their bank account safe. That you can get alerts to help monitor their accounts. So we can even help, our clients with trying to protect their personal information, even the stuff that's not here. The stuff that's here, I feel like is on lockdown. I'm really impressed with all of our cybersecurity, but we can even help people with their personal finances, credit, stuff like that. That's not here.
For sure. Well, and again, the biggest thing, one of the things that I would want our clients to know is we don't send out your money based on an email.
Right.
We're going to call you. It is again, we take that stuff incredibly seriously, both in terms of Raymond James, who sends us phishing, fake phishing things all the time to double check because the biggest uh, entry point for any cyber crime is a human. I mean,
Right.
somebody clicked on something, or they did something, or they sent money they weren't supposed to send. And so, not only do they do a good job of checking us, but it's our policy, for obvious reasons, that we don't send money out based on emails. So, we're going to call you. We're going to make sure. It's incredibly important to us. One of the interesting things, Scott, that I did, and I don't remember if there was a dollar amount, it might be $1 million, that if there's an error in any way on Raymond James' part, that that they make a mistake, that somehow they did, your money got somewhere it wasn't supposed to go. I think that they have a guarantee of some sort
Yeah.
to
You're right. To make them whole. Yeah,
yeah
that's right.
to
Yeah,
make
that's
you
right.
whole. So
Yeah. And
again,
I guarantee you we're not sending out $1 million without a phone
I
call. So,
guarantee you, I don't want to send out $50 without talking to somebody on the
yeah.
phone. So,
Right.
Scott, anything else kind of as we're wrapping up?
Couple things. One, I wanted to give a shout out to my dad, to Bob. His 85th birthday is this month. So happy birthday to Bob. He's doing really well. I know a lot of our clients have used to work with Bob. So he was sort of the founder of our practice back in the early 70s, and still going strong. He asks about our clients all the time, and lots of them ask about him. And I'm always pleased to
For sure.
relay those messages along. So, yeah, I wanted to make sure to get that out there to him.
Absolutely. Well, and fair to say, all of our clients have benefited from Bob.
Yeah,
So, he has been a great mentor both to you for your entire life, and for me, at least in terms of my career. And so, yeah, and I think it's fair to say, no, nobody's self-made.
right.
And you and I both attribute a lot of our success, I think, to your dad. So,
Yeah,
happy birthday, Bob. William.
yeah, WR. Um, and then on sort of just a different note, I'm not the first one to point this out, but a show came on last week. It was about the presidents, I believe, and they were highlighting Andrew Jackson. And man, what a wild card that guy was. And it just reminded me so much of our current election situation, because he was a man of the people. He fought against sort of the what he looked at as the American aristocracy, basically the Virginia presidents, and he was the first president elected that sort of represented the West, even though he was from Tennessee. That at the time was the West. But the campaigns were full of mudslinging. It was really the first campaigns that were like that. They were just nasty. This man, this man was shot in two different duels, which I love. Like, he got shot in the chest once and survived. I think he got shot I don't remember, somewhere else, the arm or a leg or something, that I think he eventually, his body pushed that bullet out. But the other one, he lived with till he died. He had an attempted assassination against him. A man brought two pistols to shoot Jackson when he was president, and both of them misfired. So Jackson attacked this man with his cane until they could arrest his attacker. But it was just he was such an interesting guy and such a, again, seen as a man of the people. I think he's the president that the Democratic Party traces their roots back to. I know in past Democratic presidents have pointed to Jackson as being like for the common person, which is what they were espousing. So his legacy was just tremendous. He presided over a really tumultuous time in American history. And he was they called him, his opponents called him King Andrew because he would not defer to the power of Congress. He kind of just did things as he saw fit, which I'm sure made his opponents very upset. But I just found, maybe not so much with the duels, but a lot of kind of corollaries to modern, our past few elections in particular, with a lot of mudslinging and whatnot, and being a man of the people or a person of the people, sort of grassroots campaign. Jackson appears to be the first one, that's cut in that mold, and just a really interesting person. I'm no expert on politics, but I just found his story interesting, and would encourage anybody to just go check out some info on Andrew Jackson. He was a really interesting guy. A hero too, a war hero.
About that, yeah, it's interesting. What all of that you talked about, what I heard was don't bet against America. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about all of the different things that we've had, as a country to face. We've seen, and I remember talking about this during COVID. A lot of these things we've seen before, just not necessarily in the same combination. So we've seen political unrest, we've seen war in other parts of the world, we've seen inflation, we've seen a lot of these things. And yeah, I'm a big believer, man, in just going back to the history and looking at, the older I get, the more like my dad I become. Yeah, I never could understand why he always watched the History Channel and some of those kinds of things. And the more, what I'm coming to learn is that one of the surest ways to understand some of the things that we're dealing with now is to look at how they've played out in the past. Not to say it's always going to be the same, but I do think we can learn a lot from that. And again, the overarching thing for me is just the resiliency of America in general, and how we tend to figure things out. And I think that if we look back over the last 4 or 5 years, I'm a big perspective guy, as you know. I try to look at things from anytime anything's even remotely seeming negative, I try to find a different perspective to look at it. And we've been through a lot even over the last 4 or 5 years, and have come through it all in all, for the most part, pretty doggone well. And that's both macro and micro. And I also believe in people, and that they can figure out whatever their circumstances are, and that we can help them. And one of our goals is to help more people. So if our team can be, if you're watching and our team can be of help to you or somebody you care about, we're here to be a second opinion, whether they need investment advice, life advice, anywhere in between. I joke, Scott, I like to do the podcast and stuff, and I've been working with the artificial intelligence to design a new piece of art, because now you can tell these things what you want to see, and they'll actually draw the picture for you. And it's a road sign. I can't get my hands to do it right, but the intersection of life and money, and that's a big part of what we do. And again, our goal is to be our client's trusted advisor, not just a trusted financial advisor. So we're here to help. Scott, anything else?
I think that's it.
Are we done? As the auctioneer says, are we done?
Yeah, I think so.
Going once, going twice, sold.
Yeah.
See everybody next time.
Yeah, have a great summer.